The front door opened before I could say one word. I was standing in my own living room with my 1-year-old daughter, Leora, on my hip, still wearing my army dress uniform, while my husband's entire family stared at me like I had committed some terrible crime. My husband, Alistair, had just slapped a DNA test onto the coffee table and said, cold as ice, "She's not my child." Then his mother, Beatrice, pointed at the door and screamed, "Get out of my house." That was the moment the front door opened, and the man who stepped inside made every person in that room go silent. But let me back up a little. That morning, I had been at Fort Liberty in North Carolina finishing paperwork after a long stretch of intensive training and administrative duty. I was tired in that deep-down military way, the kind of tired that gets into your bones and stays there, but I was happy. I was finally going home. My daughter Leora was in daycare near the base, and all I could think about was picking her up, kissing her soft little cheeks, and driving back to Raleigh to sleep in my own bed next to my husband of 7 years. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Alistair. "Don't be late tonight. Mom has a surprise waiting for you." I stared at the message for a second and smiled. A surprise. After months of cold calls, short replies, and conversations that felt more like duty reports than a marriage, I thought maybe Alistair was finally trying to bridge the gap. Maybe his mother, Beatrice, had finally decided to welcome me instead of treating my service like some personal inconvenience to her social standing. I texted back, "That's sweet. I'll be there by 6. When I picked up Leora, she reached for me with both arms, babbling, "Mama, Mama." Like she had been waiting all day to tell me everything that had happened in her tiny world. I strapped her into her car seat, fixed the little lavender bow in her hair, and drove home with the windows cracked, the spring air filling the car. I remember thinking, maybe this is the start of something better. Maybe the distance is finally over. The house looked warm when I pulled into the driveway. Lights were on, casting a golden glow against the white siding. But then I noticed the cars lining the curb, Alistair's truck, his sister's SUV, his uncle's old sedan, and of course, Beatrice's expensive black Mercedes parked right in the center of the driveway like a throne. I laughed softly to myself. Well, Leora girl, looks like Grandma Beatrice went all out for this surprise. But when I carried Leora up the steps and opened the front door, the warmth disappeared instantly. The living room was packed. Alistair's relatives sat shoulder to shoulder on the couch, in folding chairs, even leaning along the wall. No one said hello. No one stood up to welcome the woman who had just spent months serving her country. No one smiled. Alistair stood near the coffee table, his face a mask of cold fury. Beatrice stood beside him, her arms folded, her eyes tracking my every movement like a hawk watching prey. I looked around, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. What's going on? Is someone hurt? Alistair didn't answer with words. He reached down, picked up a white envelope, and threw a single sheet of paper onto the table. "DNA test results," he said, his voice trembling with a calculated rage. "She's not my child. You've been playing me for a fool while you were away on duty. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick, like lead. Leora grabbed my collar, confused by the heavy silence and the sudden tension. I looked at the paper, then at Alistair. "What are you talking about?" "Alistair, that's impossible." "You know that's impossible." Beatrice stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor I had paid to refinish last summer. "We know what you did, Serafina. You brought a bastard into this family and expected us to foot the bill for your infidelity. You humiliated my son. You humiliated the Thorn name." Then she pointed her long, manicured finger at the door. "Get out of my house." "Your house?" I whispered, my voice finally finding its edge. "Alistair and I pay the mortgage. My name is on the deed." "Not for long," Alistair snapped. "I want you out. Now. Take your things and leave." Before I could say another word, before the sob rising in my throat could break, the front door opened behind me. A deep, resonant voice cut through the room like a blade. "Captain Thorne." Everyone turned. Colonel Silas Vance stepped into the room in full uniform. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Colonel Vance stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, the silver eagles on his shoulders catching the light. He wasn't a man who needed to raise his voice to command a room. His presence alone shifted the atmosphere from a lynch mob to a military briefing. I instinctively straightened my posture, balancing Leora on my hip. "Good evening, sir," I said, my voice cracking slightly despite my best efforts. He nodded, his eyes sharp and analytical. "At ease, Captain." I noticed the gathering from the street. "I came to deliver the commendation files you forgot at the office." His eyes swept across the room, taking in the packed living room, the relatives sitting stiffly, Alistair's pale, sweating face, and Beatrice still pointing toward the door. Finally, he looked at the tears gathering in Leora's bright eyes. The colonel frowned. "I seem to have interrupted a private matter." No one answered. Alistair swallowed hard, clearly intimidated by the high-ranking officer. "Colonel Vance, this is a family matter. It's personal." "So I gathered." The colonel's calm voice somehow made the room even quieter. He looked at me, ignoring the others. "Captain Thorne, are you all right?" I wanted to answer. I really did. But the betrayal was so fresh, so sharp, that my throat felt like it was filled with glass. Instead, Leora buried her face against my shoulder and began crying softly, her tiny sobs the only sound in the room. Colonel Vance took one slow, deliberate step into the room. "I came here to congratulate one of my finest intelligence officers on her exceptional service and her recent promotion recommendations." I wasn't expecting to walk into a disaffected courtroom. His eyes shifted toward Alistair. "You mentioned a DNA test?" Alistair forced a nervous, shaky smile. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. She's been unfaithful." Beatrice quickly jumped in, trying to regain control. "Colonel, we're just dealing with some unpleasant family business. Serafina needs to leave so we can process this quietly." He didn't react to her. Instead, he noticed the paper lying on the coffee table. "May I?" Alistair hesitated, looking at his mother, before picking it up and handing it over. "It's a laboratory report. It's conclusive." Colonel Vance adjusted his reading glasses and carefully scanned the document. The room was so still you could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Nobody spoke. Even Leora had stopped crying, sensing the shift in power. After nearly a minute of intense scrutiny, the colonel lowered the paper. "Who ordered this test?" Vance asked. Alistair answered immediately. "I did. While she was at training. I took a sample from Leora's hairbrush." "And where was it performed?" Alistair named a private laboratory located in a strip mall 3 towns over. A place I had never heard of. The colonel looked back down at the report, his mouth set in a thin line. Then he quietly asked another question. "Was Captain Thorne present when this sample was collected?" Alistair looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "No. I didn't want her to interfere." "Was there a court order?" "No." "Was the chain of custody documented by a third-party witness?" Alistair blinked, his confidence beginning to crumble under the colonel's clinical questioning. I don't know. The lab said it was fine." The colonel folded the report neatly and placed it back on the table. "I've spent over 30 years in the army making decisions based on intelligence and evidence. I've seen forgeable documents from 4 different continents." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on Beatrice. "This isn't evidence. This is a printout." Beatrice scoffed, her face turning a deep shade of red. "It proves she cheated on my son. It proves that child isn't a Thorne." Colonel Vance calmly shook his head. "No, ma'am. It proves someone paid for a result they wanted to see." The room went silent again. Alistair's uncle cleared his throat and looked at the floor. His sister exchanged a nervous, wide-eyed glance with her husband. For the first time since I'd walked through the door, I saw a flicker of uncertainty on their faces. Colonel Vance turned toward me. Captain Thorne. Yes, sir. Did you ever consent to this? No, sir. I didn't even know he had doubts. Were you informed that your daughter's genetic material was being sent to an unverified facility? No, sir. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. I thought not. Alistair suddenly raised his voice, his desperation showing. So, what are you saying? She's innocent just because you're her boss? The test says what it says. I'm saying, the colonel replied evenly, that accusing an officer of the United States Army of a moral failing without verified, legal evidence is a dangerous game. And doing it in front of a gallery of relatives to force her out of her own home is beneath the dignity of this uniform she wears. He stepped beside me, a protective barrier between me and the people who were supposed to love me. Captain Thorne, I believe you and Leora should leave here tonight. Not because they told you to, but because this environment is no longer conducive to your well-being or the child's. He looked directly at Alistair, his eyes turning cold. And I strongly suggest no one makes another accusation until a court-ordered, accredited laboratory establishes the truth. Because if this is a fabrication, the legal repercussions will be significant. As I adjusted Leora against my shoulder and turned toward the door, I realized something had shifted deep inside me. The shock was being replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I wasn't walking away ashamed, I was walking away with the only person who had stood up for the truth. Colonel Vance walked me and Leora all the way to my car. The evening air felt strangely cold for spring. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to buckle Leora into her car seat. The colonel waited patiently, standing guard at the rear door until I clicked the buckle shut. Captain Thorne, he said quietly. Take a deep breath. I looked at him, and for the first time that night, the tears finally spilled over. I don't understand, Colonel. How could he do this? I've been working so hard for us, for our future. He didn't offer a platitude. Instead, he handed me a clean handkerchief. In my experience, when people stage a spectacle like the one inside, they aren't looking for the truth, they're looking for an exit strategy. They needed you to be the villain so they could justify their own actions. I never cheated on him, sir. Leora is his. I would swear it on my life. I believe you, he said. Those 3 words were the first bit of solid ground I'd felt in hours. Now, where can you go? My friend, Captain Kaylin Reed. She has a place in Kerry. Good. Go there. Don't answer your phone. Don't engage with Alistair or his mother tonight. He reached into his pocket and handed me a card. This is a family law attorney, Juliana Sterling. She handles high-conflict cases for military personnel. Call her at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you, sir. I don't know why you did this. He looked back at the house, where the shadows of the Thorne family were visible through the curtains. Because I've seen how this ends when an officer has no one in their corner. And because you're too good a soldier to lose to a pack of cowards. I drove away, watching my house, the house I had picked out, the house with the nursery I had painted by hand, disappear in the rearview mirror. Kaylin Reed was waiting for me at the door of her townhouse. She didn't ask questions. She just took Leora from my arms, saw my face, and pulled me inside. Guest room is ready, she said. The monitor is on the nightstand. Cry if you need to, but tomorrow, Serafina, we go to war. Later that night, after Leora finally fell asleep in a portable crib, I sat at Kaylin's kitchen table. My phone was blowing up. 47 missed calls. 32 text messages from Alistair. Asterisk, where did you go? Asterisk. Asterisk, running away makes you look guilty. Asterisk. Asterisk, mom says you left because you couldn't face the truth. Asterisk. Then, one message from an unknown number caught my eye. It was an image file. I opened it, and my heart stopped. It was a photo of Alistair sitting at a bar, laughing, with his arm around a woman I didn't recognize. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago, while I was in the field. I realized then that the DNA test wasn't a mistake. It wasn't paranoia. It was a weapon. They had planned this. The next morning, while Alistair was presumably at work, I used my spare key to enter the house one last time to get Leora's medical records and my birth certificate. The house was eerily quiet. I went to the office, intending only to grab my files, but I saw Alistair's laptop sitting on the desk. It was unlocked. I shouldn't have looked. But the intelligence officer in me couldn't help it. I clicked on the browser history. There were searches for how to faking DNA results, private investigators Raleigh, and transferring joint assets to individual accounts. But the most damning thing was a folder on the desktop labeled the plan. I opened it and found an email draft addressed to Beatrice. It detailed exactly how they were going to use the fake report to kick me out and claim abandonment so Alistair could keep the house and the savings. As I sat there, stunned by the level of premeditation, I heard a car pull into the driveway. It wasn't Alistair's truck. It was Beatrice's Mercedes. I didn't have much time. I quickly took photos of the screen with my phone, logged out, and slipped into the hallway just as I heard her key turn in the lock. I made it out the back door just as she entered the front. As I drove away, I felt a cold, hard resolve settle over me. They thought they had kicked out a broken woman with one suitcase. They had no idea they had just declared war on an intelligence officer who now had all the evidence she needed to burn their world down. I pulled over into a parking lot and dialed Juliana Sterling's number. When she picked up, I didn't cry. I didn't stumble over my words. "My name is Captain Serafina Thorne," I said, watching the morning sun hit the military decals on my windshield. "I need you to help me destroy a lie. And after that, I'm going to need you to help me take back my house." Juliana Sterling's office was located in a restored brick building in downtown Raleigh, the kind of place that smelled like expensive mahogany and old-growth justice. When I walked in, still in my fatigues, I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a captain who had spent the last decade analyzing threats and neutralizing them before they could breach the perimeter. Juliana didn't offer me tea or platitudes. She took one look at the photos on my phone, the screenshots of the plan, and her eyes sharpened. "They aren't just trying to divorce you, Serafina," she said, scrolling through the images of Alistair's laptop. "They're trying to erase you." In North Carolina, the abandonment claim is a powerful tool in domestic litigation. If they could prove you walked out on the marriage and the child based on guilt from an affair, they could theoretically bar you from alimony, claim the house as a separate asset, and gun for sole custody. It's a scorched earth policy. "The DNA test is a forgery," I said, my voice as steady as if I were giving a sitrep in a war room. "I need an official, court-admissible test immediately. And I need a forensic accountant. Alistair has been moving money." Juliana nodded, her pen flying across a notepad. "We'll file an emergency motion for a paternity test today. But there's a complication. Who is on the deed of the house?" "I am," I said. "I bought it with my enlistment bonus and my inheritance from my grandmother. But Beatrice, she helped with the closing costs. She insisted on gifting us $20,000 to lower the interest rate." Juliana's expression darkened. "And I'm guessing she made you sign something?" I remembered the day of the closing. Leora had been crying, I was exhausted from a 48-hour shift, and Beatrice had slipped a simple document in front of me, saying it was just a formality for her tax records. I had trusted my family. I had signed it. "I need to find that document," I whispered. The next few days were a blur of military precision and domestic chaos. I reported for duty at Fort Liberty, knowing the rumors would eventually reach the base. In the military, your reputation is your currency. If Alistair and Beatrice succeeded in painting me as an unfaithful officer who had lied about her child's paternity, my security clearance would be revoked. I would lose my career alongside my home. Colonel Silas Vance called me into his office on Tuesday morning. He was a man made of granite and grit, a veteran who had seen everything. "Captain Thorne," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I've received an anonymous tip regarding your personal conduct. Something about a DNA dispute and a domestic disturbance." "Sir," I said, standing at attention. It is a coordinated attempt to commit fraud and defamation against a commissioned officer. I am currently working with civilian and military legal counsel to provide proof of the forgery. Vance looked at me for a long time. Serafina, you're one of my best intelligence officers. You know as well as I do that an anonymous tip is rarely anonymous. It usually comes from someone who wants to see the target neutralized. I can protect your clearance for 30 days while you sort this out. After that, if there's no proof of your innocence, I'll have to report the situation to the Department of Defense. Conduct unbecoming isn't just a phrase, Captain. It's a career ender. The clock was officially ticking. I met Kaylin Reed for lunch at a small diner near the base. Kaylin had been my rock, but even she looked worried. I did some digging, Sarah, she said, sliding a folder across the table. I used some of my contacts in the local PD. That DNA lab Alistair used? It's a shell company. It's registered to a P.O. box in South Carolina that traces back to a holding firm owned by Beatrice's brother. I felt a surge of cold fury. They didn't just find a shady lab. They built one. It gets worse, Kaylin continued. Alistair has been seen with Juliana Sterling's rival, a lawyer named Thomas Thorne. No relation to you, but he's a shark who specializes in making military spouses look like unstable monsters. They're preparing to file for an emergency restraining order against you, claiming you're a flight risk with Leora because of your mental state and military background. I realized then that I couldn't stay at Kaylin's forever. If I didn't fight for my space now, I would lose the house by default. That afternoon, I returned to the house with a police escort. I had the right to enter my own home, and I wasn't going to let Beatrice intimidate me. When we pulled up, Alistair's truck was in the driveway. Beatrice's Mercedes was right behind it. The officer, a young man named Deputy Miller, looked at me. "You sure about this, Captain?" "I'm sure," I said. As soon as we stepped inside, Beatrice was there, her voice a screeching siren. "How dare you? You bring the police to our home? You've already shamed this family enough." Alistair stood behind her, looking pale and pathetic. "Serafina, just go. You're making this harder for Leora." "Leora is with Kaylin," I said, my voice echoing through the foyer. "And I am here for my legal documents." "Alistair, I know about the plan folder. I know about the shell company DNA lab. And I know you've been draining our joint savings." Alistair flinched. For a second, I saw the man I had married, the man who was too weak to stand up to his mother and too cowardly to be honest. But Beatrice stepped in front of him, her eyes like flint. "You have no proof of anything, you little girl. That house is mine. I bought my way into the deed the second you signed that gift agreement." "It wasn't a gift, Serafina. It was a private loan agreement with a default clause. You haven't made a single payment to me in 3 years. You're in breach of contract. I've already filed for a quiet title action." I felt the ground shift beneath me. She had been planning this for years. Every holiday, every generous gesture, every time she offered to help, it was all a setup to seize the one thing I had built for myself. "I signed a gift letter for the bank, Beatrice," I said. "If you have a side agreement that says otherwise, that's mortgage fraud." Beatrice laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Try proving it. In the meantime, the locks are being changed the moment you walk out that door. And since you've abandoned the residence to stay with a friend, the court will see this as my primary residence now. Alistair and I are a united front. You're just a guest who overstayed her welcome." I looked at Deputy Miller. He looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, if there's a dispute over the deed and a signed contract, it's a civil matter. I can't force them to let you stay if they're claiming a breach of a private agreement." I had to leave. If I stayed and fought, it would look like a domestic disturbance, and Alistair would use it to get that restraining order. I had to play the long game. I walked to the office, grabbed my lockbox, and headed for the door. As I passed Beatrice, she leaned in, her voice a poisonous whisper. "Go back to your little army, Serafina. By the time you're done with your next deployment, Leora won't even remember your name." She'll have a new mother, someone who doesn't prioritize a uniform over her family. I didn't slap her. I didn't scream. I just looked her in the eye. You think you've won because you have the keys. But you forgot one thing, Beatrice. I'm an intelligence officer. I don't just see what's in front of me. I see the whole map. And right now, you're walking straight into an ambush. I walked out with my head high, carrying the one suitcase I had packed, but this time, I had my lockbox tucked under my arm. Inside that box wasn't just my passport. It was the original gift letter I had made Alistair sign and notarize, without Beatrice's knowledge, 3 years ago. I had insisted on it just in case the bank asked questions. I had forgotten I had it until Beatrice mentioned the loan. I got into my car and drove straight to Juliana Sterling's office. We have them, I said, placing the notarized gift letter on her desk. She's claiming it was a loan. This document, signed by her son, says it was a gift. That's perjury and fraud if she files that quiet title action. Juliana grinned. This is good. But it's not enough to keep the house right now. The court moves slowly, and Beatrice has money to burn on delays. Serafina, you need to be prepared. They're going to drag this out for years. They want to bankrupt you and break your spirit. I have 5 years of back pay and hazard pay saved in a private account Alistair never knew about, I said. And I just got word from Colonel Vance. There's a high-level intelligence task force forming in Europe. It's a 2-year assignment, IT pays triple my current salary, and it's a career maker. If you leave, they'll use it for the custody battle, Juliana warned. Not if I leave Leora in the legal custody of my mother in Virginia, with a court-ordered visitation schedule for Alistair that he has to pay for, I countered. And not if I use that time to let them think they've won. Let them live in the house. Let Beatrice pay the property taxes. Let Alistair get comfortable with his new mother for Leora. What are you planning, Serafina? I'm going to let them think I've surrendered. I'm going to go overseas, I'm going to work, and I'm going to gather every piece of evidence of their financial crimes. Beatrice's family business isn't as clean as she thinks it is. I've been looking at their tax filings. There are gaps, Juliana. Gaps an intelligence officer can fall right through. I took a deep breath, looking at a photo of Leora. I'm going to disappear for a while. I'm going to let them feel safe in that house. And when I come back, I'm not just going to take my daughter. I'm going to take everything they own. The next month was the hardest of my life. I had to tell Leora goodbye. I moved her to my mother's house, a quiet farm in Virginia where she would be safe from Beatrice's poison. The court granted Alistair supervised visitation every other weekend, which he rarely used because it was too far to drive. It was exactly what I expected. He didn't want a daughter, he wanted a victory. The day I left for my deployment, I drove past the house one last time. I saw Beatrice in the front yard, directing a landscaping crew. She looked like the queen of the manor. She saw my car and waved, a mocking, triumphant gesture. I didn't wave back. I just touched the folder on my passenger seat. It contained the start of a dossier titled Operation Thorn. 5 years. That was the timeline. 5 years to accumulate the wealth, the evidence, and the legal leverage to dismantle the Thorn family legacy piece by piece. As I boarded the transport plane at Fort Liberty, Colonel Silas Vance was there to see me off. You have your mission, Captain, he said, shaking my hand. Yes, sir, I replied. Collect intelligence. Analyze the enemy. Strike when the objective is vulnerable. I wasn't talking about the task force, Serafina, he said with a rare, knowing smile. Neither was I, sir. The engines roared to life, and as the North Carolina coastline faded into the clouds, the woman who had been kicked out with one suitcase died. In her place was Major Serafina Thorn, and she was going to war. Over the next few years, I moved through the shadows of international intelligence, but my eyes were always on the home front. Every cent I earned was funneled into an untouchable trust. Every piece of information I gathered about Beatrice's brother's shell companies was filed away. I watched from across the ocean as Alistair's life began to crumble. Without my income to subsidize his lifestyle, he began to lean more heavily on Beatrice, and Beatrice, ever the control freak, began to choke him. They had the house, but they didn't have the peace. But the biggest move was yet to come. I had found the ultimate leverage. Beatrice hadn't just committed mortgage fraud. She had been laundering money through her brother's lab to avoid inheritance taxes from her late husband's estate. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for the right moment to come home. My 5 years were almost up, and the house, my house, was about to go on the market for a price only one person would be willing to pay. The sand of the Middle East and the grey corridors of European intelligence hubs became my world for 5 long years. I didn't just serve my country, I sharpened my mind into a blade. Every tactical analysis I wrote, every high-value target I tracked, and every logistical nightmare I solved was a rehearsal for my return to North Carolina. I wasn't the broken woman who walked down that driveway in the rain anymore. I was Major Serafina Thorne now, a woman who understood that the most effective wars are won before the first shot is even fired. During my deployment, I stayed in constant contact with Captain Kalen Reed. Kalen wasn't just my best friend, he was my eyes and ears on the ground. While I was coordinating intelligence assets in the field, Kalen was quietly monitoring the public records of the Thorne family interests. Every few months, I'd receive an encrypted file from him. It started with small things: Beatrice taking out a second mortgage on the estate, Alistair being passed over for a promotion he desperately needed to maintain his car collection, and the slow, agonizing decline of the Thorne legacy. "They're bleeding out, Serafina," Kalen told me during a secure call 3 years into my absence. "Alistair is selling off his stocks to pay for his club memberships. Beatrice is trying to keep up appearances, but the cracks are showing. She's been pulling money out of her brother's accounts, and the IRS is starting to sniff around the lab." I listened, my heart cold and steady. Let them bleed. I want them to feel the walls closing in. I want them to look at that house every night and wonder if the lights will stay on. My only source of light during those years was Leorad. I watched her grow through pixelated video calls. She went from a toddler taking her first steps on my mother's farm to a bright, 5-year-old girl who looked exactly like me, but with a spark of joy I hadn't yet reclaimed. My mother kept her safe, far away from Beatrice's manipulation. Alistair's visits were non-existent. Once the legal battle for his money started, he lost interest in the daughter he claimed was his victory. To him, Leora was an expense he couldn't afford. To me, she was the reason I kept my boots polished and my resolve hardened. When my orders finally came to return to Fort Liberty, I didn't notify Alistair. I didn't notify Beatrice. The only person waiting for me at the airfield, besides my mother and a beaming Leora, was Juliana Sterling. "Welcome home, Major," Juliana said, handing me a thick blue folder as Leora hugged my waist. "I hope you're ready. The house went into pre-foreclosure this morning. Beatrice's brother was indicted on federal charges yesterday. His assets are frozen, which means Beatrice's supplemental income has vanished. They're desperate." I looked down at Leora, who was playing with the ribbons on my uniform. "Desperate people make mistakes, Juliana. And the Thornes have been making mistakes for 5 years." The next week was a whirlwind of calculated moves. I met with Colonel Silas Vance in his office. He had watched my career trajectory with pride, and he knew exactly why I was back. "The intelligence you provided regarding those shell companies led to a much larger investigation, Serafina," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've done a service to the Army and the Treasury. But I suspect your personal mission is just beginning." "It's not a mission anymore, sir," I replied. "It's a closing argument. I utilized the trust one had built over 5 years, money saved from combat pay, smart investments Kalen had helped me manage, and a significant whistleblower settlement that had quietly landed in my account after the federal investigation into Beatrice's brother's lab. I had more than enough. I created a shell corporation titled Aegis Holdings. It was a name they wouldn't recognize, a silent predator in the real estate market. I sat in Juliana's office as she made the call to the listing agent for the Thorne estate. Beatrice had tried to list it quietly, hoping to sell it before the bank seized it, desperate to walk away with enough cash to disappear to a condo in Florida. "My client is prepared to make a cash offer," Juliana said into the speakerphone. "Full asking price, no contingencies, 30-day close. But there is one condition. The sellers must vacate the property 48 hours before closing. My client wants a clean sweep." On the other end of the line, the agent sounded breathless. 30 days? Cash? I'll present it to Mrs. Thorne immediately. She's very motivated to move. I felt a ghost of a smile touch my lips. Motivated was an understatement. Beatrice was drowning, and I was the only one throwing her a rope. She just didn't know the rope was a noose. 2 weeks later, Kaylin and I drove past the house in a nondescript SUV. The for sale sign had a sold sticker slapped across it. We watched from a distance as a moving truck sat in the driveway. It wasn't the massive, professional crew Beatrice usually hired. It was a budget company, and Alistair was personally carrying boxes to the curb. He looked haggard, his designer shirt wrinkled, his face red from the humidity and the humiliation. Beatrice stood on the porch, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. She was screaming at the movers, her voice carried across the lawn. She looked like a relic of a forgotten era, a queen whose palace had been turned into a prison. "Look at them," Kaylin whispered. "They have no idea who just bought their sanctuary." "They will," I said. "In 48 hours, the locks change. And then I'm inviting them back for one final conversation." The 48 hours passed in a blur of tactical precision. I didn't just buy a house, I bought back my dignity. I had the professional cleaners come in and scrub every inch of the place, erasing the scent of Beatrice's expensive perfume and Alistair's arrogance. I moved my furniture in modern, strong pieces that didn't belong to the Thorne era. I hung a photo of Leora in the grand foyer, right where Beatrice's ancestral portrait used to hang. On the day of the final confrontation, I dressed in my full Class A uniform. Every medal, every ribbon, every stripe on my sleeve was a testament to the 5 years they thought would break me. I stood in the center of the living room, the same room where I had been told I wasn't enough, where I had been handed a suitcase and told to disappear. I had Juliana send a message to Alistair and Beatrice. A clerical error regarding the closing documents required their presence at the house one last time to sign over the final deed. They were so desperate for the remaining payout from the sale that they arrived 10 minutes early. I watched through the window as their beat-up SUV pulled into the driveway. They didn't even notice the new security system or the way the lawn had been perfectly manicured in just 2 days. They walked up the steps with their heads down, defeated but still greedy. The front door was unlocked. They walked in, Beatrice leading the way, her eyes darting around the revamped living room. "This furniture is hideous," she snapped, her voice echoing in the hallway. "Whoever bought this place has absolutely no taste." "Actually, Beatrice, I think the taste is quite a step up from the stagnant air of the past," I said, stepping out from the kitchen. The silence that followed was deafening. Alistair stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping so far he looked like a caricature of himself. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes bulging as they swept over my uniform, my rank, and the cold, unwavering stare I leveled at her. "Serafina?" Alistair stammered, his voice cracking. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be somewhere else." "Germany? The desert?" "I'm home, Alistair," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "And you're standing in my living room." Beatrice recovered first, though her face was a pale shade of gray. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but we have an appointment with the new owners. You need to leave immediately. I'll call the police." I took a slow step forward, the click of my heels on the hardwood floor sounding like a ticking clock. "The police already have your address, Beatrice. They've been very interested in your brother's financial records, but as for the house? You're looking at the owner. Aegis Holdings is my company. I bought this house with the money I earned while you were busy trying to hide your stolen inheritance." Alistair looked around the room, realization dawning on him like a slow-motion car crash. You? You bought the house? I bought the house you kicked me out of with one suitcase, I said, leaning against the doorframe. I bought the memories of the woman you tried to destroy. And now, I'm the one telling you to get out. Beatrice's face contorted with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. You can't do this. We have nowhere to go. The bank took the cars, the accounts are empty. That sounds like a personal problem, Beatrice, I interrupted. A family matter, as you used to say. I believe your exact words were, you humiliated this family. Well, take a look around. Who's humiliated now? Alistair took a step toward me, a desperate, pathetic look in his eyes. Serafina, look, I know things got heated. We were stressed. But we're family. Leora is my daughter. We can work this out. Maybe we can stay in the guest wing until we get back on our feet. I felt a surge of cold laughter bubble up in my chest. The guest wing? Alistair, you haven't seen Leora in 4 years. You didn't even send a birthday card. You didn't care about being a father, you cared about being a thorn. And now, there's nothing left of that name but the debt you owe the government. I pulled a manila folder from the counter and tossed it onto the coffee table. It was the same gesture Daniel had used years ago, but this time, the papers inside were real. These are the documents detailing the investigation into the lab. The FBI will be at your rental property by tomorrow morning. I suggest you use the next few hours to find a very good lawyer, though I doubt you can afford one. Beatrice began to tremble, her carefully constructed facade finally shattering into 1,000 pieces. She looked at the photo of Leora on the wall and then back at me. You planned this. From the moment you left. You've been waiting for this. I didn't just wait, Beatrice, I said, my voice hardening. I worked. I served. I survived. While you were busy being a gatekeeper of a crumbling empire, I was becoming the person who could tear it down. You gave me one suitcase and expected me to vanish. Instead, I used that suitcase to carry the weight of my future until I could buy back my past. I checked my watch. You have 5 minutes to leave my property. If you're still here in 6, I'll have the MPs escort you off. My friend Kalen is waiting at the end of the driveway, and he's very eager to see you out. Alistair tried to speak, to beg, to find some shred of the power he used to hold over me, but he found nothing. He saw a major in the United States Army who looked at him with nothing but pity. He grabbed Beatrice's arm, and for the first time in his life, he led her toward the door instead of following her lead. As they reached the threshold, I called out one last time. Alistair? He turned, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Don't worry about the suitcase, I said. I've already thrown it in the trash. You won't be needing it where you're going. I watched them walk down the steps, their shadows long and pathetic against the North Carolina sun. They reached the end of the driveway where Kalen stood by his vehicle, arms crossed, a satisfied grin on his face as he watched them climb into their rusted SUV and drive away from the house that was no longer theirs. I stood in the silence of the foyer, the air finally feeling clean. The house was mine. The history was mine to rewrite. And in a few hours, Leora would be coming home to the room I had designed for her, a room filled with books, light, and the knowledge that her mother was a woman who could never be broken. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water, my hands perfectly steady. The mission wasn't just about the house. It was about the moment I looked in the mirror and realized that the woman with the suitcase was gone, replaced by someone who didn't need anyone's permission to exist. But as I sat down at the table, Juliana's phone rang. Her voice was urgent. Serafina, there's a complication. Beatrice didn't just hide money. I just got a tip from the federal prosecutor. There's a second set of books she kept, ones that link her directly to a contractor who's been under surveillance for years. If this goes where I think it's going, she's not just going to lose her money, she's going to lose her freedom for a very long time. And Alistair? He signed off on those documents as a witness. I looked at the empty hallway, the weight of the 5 years finally settling into a different kind of resolve. Then let the chips fall where they may, Juliana. I have my house. Now, let's make sure they have their cell. The battle for the house was over, but the final act of Operation Thorn was about to bring the entire legacy down in a way even I hadn't anticipated. It was time to call Colonel Vance. There was one more piece of intelligence I needed to hand over. I dialed Colonel Silas Vance on my secure line as the sun began to set over the roof of the house I now officially owned. "Sir, this is Captain Thorne. The final phase of the internal investigation is complete. I have the secondary ledgers Juliana Sterling recovered. It's all here, the kickbacks, the shell companies, and the proof of contract tampering." Vance's voice was steady and professional. "Excellent work, Serafina. I'll have a team meet you at the precinct to process the evidence. This goes far beyond a domestic dispute now. Federal prosecutors have been waiting for this link." The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and military precision. As it turned out, Beatrice Thorne hadn't just been a controlling matriarch, she had been the architect of a massive financial fraud scheme involving government contractors, using Alistair's name as a front for several illegal transactions. While I was away on intelligence missions, they were building a house of cards. Now, that house had collapsed. Alistair tried to reach out once, a desperate, pathetic email claiming he was a victim of his mother's influence. I didn't reply. I handed the message to Juliana, who added it to the pile of evidence that eventually led to his indictment for conspiracy. He had stood by and watched me be exiled with nothing but a single suitcase, and now, he would have to learn how to live in a space much smaller than the mansion he had tried to steal from me, a prison cell. As for the house, I stripped away the heavy, dark velvet curtains Beatrice loved and opened the windows to let the light in. I replaced the cold, antique furniture with pieces that were meant to be lived in, played on, and enjoyed. I turned Beatrice's parlor into a playroom for Leora, filled with soft rugs, colorful books, and toys that made noise. One afternoon, Captain Kaelin Reed stopped by with a bottle of champagne and a stuffed bear for Leora. We stood on the back deck, looking out over the yard. "You did it, Sarah," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You actually bought the fortress." "I didn't just buy a house, Kaelin," I replied, watching Leora chase a butterfly across the grass. "I took back the ground they tried to bury me in." I looked down at the old, battered suitcase I had kept in the back of the closet, the same one Alistair had thrown at my feet 5 years ago. I finally took it out to the curb and left it for the trash collectors. I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't the woman running away with her life in a bag. I was Captain Serafina Thorne, a woman who had built a kingdom out of the very stones they had thrown at her. My journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about proving that your value isn't determined by who stands with you, but by who you become when you stand alone. I had walked out of that door a broken wife, and I had walked back into it a commander of my own destiny. If you enjoyed this story of resilience and justice, don't forget to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever turned a setback into a massive comeback? I'd love to hear your stories. And make sure to subscribe for more powerful narratives of strength and triumph. Thank you for watching. The end.